Welcome everybody. Welcome to halftime, to kick off after halftime. This is our third of 4 sofa sessions. My name is Mathis Hampel. I'm the program director of Urban Future Global Conference, and I welcome to today's sofa session on the topic of behavior change. Talking about behavior change is very apt because we quickly had to make a few changes to the program today. Still waiting for our second speaker. So before we start the program, I'd like to run a quick poll for you. This poll you will all be, in a sense, familiar with because you've all lived through the lockdown of the last 3 months. And the question here is, what kind of behavior did you change over the last 3 months? And there are multiple choices. So also feel free to add something in the chat if there's anything not on the list. Whilst you are clicking the poll, I'd also like to welcome those on live stream via Facebook. Today, you will not be able to see the poll. For that, you will have to register for the next meeting or for this meeting if you can be very quick using the link. For those who are in the meeting, you have now entered the answers to the poll, and we will after or shortly show you the results. Meanwhile, a quick introduction to the platform Zoom. I find it really nice if you all have or if most of you have your cameras on. I think that's really nice to see who's there, just because, you know, like in a normal meeting or in a physical meeting, when you meet at the conference, you always look around, looking at other people. So I find it just really nice to see where you are in your living rooms or in your gardens, or maybe in a public pool. And what's also really nice, if you go on full screen, so you can see all the people, and click gallery view, which is on the top right of your screen. As you know, you also have a chat function. So if there are any questions you want to raise, just enter it in the chat and we will put you live through. So what we're going to do is we have Q&A, and if you prefer, you can also ask the question you put in the chat live on air. Coming to the speakers, I'm really happy to have a guest today. My first guest here is a beautiful mind. She's a shrewd observer. She is I must say, a shrewd observer of everyday life and of people and of society in general. Her name is Margaret Heffernan. I'm sure you all know her. She is a producer. She's a writer, and she has recently published a book. Tellingly, she's writing about pandemics, but for our topic, more interesting is a book she wrote a couple of years ago, and it's called Willful, Blindness, Why We Ignore the Obvious at Our Peril. So a warm welcome to Margaret Heffernan, our speaker today. As this is a live session, it could be that our second speaker, Jenny Cross, will still join us. As for now, she seems to have technical problems, so we really hope she's going to be with us anytime soon. So let's look at the poll. You can all see the poll answers very quickly. And I would find it interesting for you, Margaret. Actually, this was a task I had envisioned for Jenny, but as I introduced you as a shrewd observer, I think it's fairly easy for you also to analyze this poll. It's about lockdown, during lockdown. What do you think? What would you make of these choices people make, of their changes of behavior?
Well, I think, first of all, what's quite interesting is, of course, people had meetups with friends and family online because we are innately social beings. And although we're often targeted by companies, by marketing, and by politicians as individuals, the fact is we can do almost nothing alone. So I'm not at all surprised that, you know, when we were told to go home and stay there, the first thing we did was find out ways to communicate with each other. I'm also not wildly surprised that nobody has changed, you know, really difficult habits. Nobody gave up, or very few people gave up cigarettes. Very few people became vegetarians. Very few people started learning a new language. So there's, you know, so there's not a lot of radically new behaviors here. I think what might be kind of interesting to think about is how far people doubled down on things that they already did. So, you know, improve my cooking skills. These are people who cook already. I think that's quite interesting. I suspect getting to know my neighbors doesn't mean I knew nobody to begin with. So probably it's about getting to know more neighbors. So there's probably quite a bit of kind of building on habits that we already have, rather than radical giving up of old habits or radical embrace of new habits. And of course, we know that, you know, it's very hard to give up habits. I mean, I'm told that whatever you give up, you have to give it up for at least 2 months before there's any kind of chance of success. If you look at the incredible dieting industry, it's very clear that actually changing our eating habits is incredibly difficult. But I think what is interesting here is that, you know, everybody changed something. So change is partly contextual. And what I think is also quite interesting is, you know, at the top, having an online meeting with friends or family. Well, the people you were having those meetings with, they had to adopt that technology too. So actually, you see a lot more change when everybody's doing it. And you can see the rapid adoption of platforms like Zoom, not so much because I love Zoom, but if it's the only way I can talk to my kids or my friends a long way away, then that's going to drive my adoption. It's a sort of network effect, which we understand in software really well.
And with respect to systemic changes, social norms and individual changes, does it surprise you that those that were actual individual choices here, they are not really, people didn't really give up cigarettes. People didn't really do many things that were due to their individual behavior. It's more like social norms and regulations. Will you agree?
I think that is generally true. I mean, it's why trends are so important, because they start to have a snowball effect. I mean, it's interesting, I think last year, at least in the well, no, I think this is globally. I may be wrong. It may only be UK. But, you know, the number of people who are vegan went from 1% to 6%. You know, that's a very big change. It's a very, very big change. Now, how sustainable is that? I don't know. It's hard to tell. But it's a very, very big change. And that is an individual change. But, you know, I go back to the point about network effects, which is I'm more likely to become vegan when people in my network become vegan. So I would say that while our family hasn't become vegetarian, under the influence of my daughter who is vegan, we all eat far, far, far less meat. So there's a lot of social change that depends on people in our immediate network. And then, of course, about broader social norms. You know, as it gets harder or more expensive, you know, to eat a big steak, I'm less likely to do it.
Yeah. So I thank you so much, Margaret. I hear that Jenny has solved some technical issues, or we have solved some technical issues together, and she's
Right.
with us. Jenny, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. I'm so glad to be with you all.
Wonderful, Jenny. Glad you're here. Oh, this is to you as well. This poll that you possibly see. I'm not sure you see the results of the poll, and I was asking how you would analyze people's answers, how they change during lockdown. What of this is systemic? What is social norms? What are individual choices? And generally, the question to you: how to make the right choice, the easy thing to do?
So, one of the most interesting things about this poll here, right, is how large that I improved my cooking skills. And so, that's really just about a systemic change, that people no longer have access to well-cooked food from other places. They're at home and may have more time. And so you see that as the biggest shift. If we compare that to started to learn a new language, our interest in and willingness to learn a new language is influenced by a whole variety of things. Now, if we were looking at the lockdown among people who were traveling overseas and got locked down somewhere else, we probably would see this learning new language skills, much higher among a group that was locked down in a place where they kind of had to learn a new language. So this improving, cooking skills is really quite interesting, that people have both the opportunity and the availability to do it. So we see that also with, making my own bread, right? That those are opportunities that were made easy for people that were actually harder for people before.
So Jenny, I didn't really introduce you, you deserve it. I had a beautiful line for you. As a brilliant researcher, you are director of the Institute for the Built Environment at the State University of Colorado in Fort Collins. And behavior change is your main research interest, but I guess also in private life and wherever you go, you have an eye on what's going on around you. So you're also interested in social networks, you are interested in conservation and sustainability. Can you tell us, recently you told me you're writing a new paper as well on these issues. Can you tell me briefly what you're currently doing? And specifically, because our guests, they're all city changers, interested in making changes in their cities. Can you tell us a little bit about the latest state of research on behavior change in this respect?
Yes. So I'm a sociologist, and sociologists, as a kind of breed of scientists, really like to think about things at different levels. They're interested both in what's happening at the kind of structural societal level and then all the way down to interactions. And I've been working in the field of public health and sustainability for the last 2 decades. And some of you might be familiar with the tools of community-based social marketing. And those tools are really helpful when we're interested in an individual behavior. Say we want to improve the rate of breastfeeding, or we want to improve people's recycling. But recycling is actually one of those places where we see really quickly that it's not just the messages that people are exposed to, but actually how we shape the physical and social environment about people. It's been known for a couple of decades that just separating the trash can from the recycling bin a few feet apart dramatically reduces the recycling rate. And so these are things that sociologists attend to, which is how does the environment, the physical environment, and the social environment, including our networks that Margaret was talking about, how do all of those things influence change? And so I've been working recently on really sticky problems. We're thinking about in the US, sustainable agricultural practices. You might or might not know that the Gulf of Mexico every year gets this massive hypoxic zone because of too much fertilizer. The Mississippi River drains 40% of the land mass of the United States, and that's all farmland that drains down into the Delta. And so it's a great collector for over-fertilization, and then it's killing that environment. So people say, well, how do we get farmers to change their behavior? And any kind of systems look helps us see that farmers are really constrained. And if our only strategy is encourage farmers, incentivize farmers, try to persuade farmers, we're actually missing that bigger structural, social, and the economic and environmental structure that farmers are part of. So these are the papers that I'm working on right now. I'm working on one about how change moves through networks and what change looks like from a network perspective. And then also, how do we solve these really big problems by understanding the system instead of just building programs that target individuals?
So from what I understand, nudging individuals was one of the paradigms of the last, let's say, 10, 15 years. And it still makes sense. Where would you apply it? If individuals itself or themselves are hard to persuade to change their minds or their behaviors, where would you, or where would it make sense to apply what we know about nudging people? Is it partly nudging? Can you nudge whole institutions or systems?
You know, the United States is having really big social conflict right now, and we're really talking about our systems. We're thinking about school systems and policing systems. People are talking about our economic systems. And one of the things I learned early in my urban sustainability work is that when you want organizations to change, change is actually happening from multiple directions. But one of the really interesting things is that other organizations have a real opportunity to nudge and to push others. So often when people are thinking that we need organizational reform, like I want my organization to care more about recycling, or I want my organization to be working on water quality and reducing pollution, or energy conservation, we need to really reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. One of the, I think, unintended opportunities for change is how organizations are able to push and nudge each other. And so by demanding and asking people that are on either sides of you in a supply chain to create change, we see that sometimes that's the opportunity for creating the greatest change. And I'm not sure if it looks quite like nudging for individuals, but one of the key things that we need to understand are that there are actors at different levels. There are individuals who are actors, but there are also groups who are actors and organizations who are actors. And sometimes people who work inside an organization feel frustrated because they can't get their leadership to change. And I always ask them to think about the network structure of the relationships to that organization and say, who has influence over your leaders, whether inside your organization or other organizations? Who is able to have leverage and put pressure and encourage them to adopt new behaviors? I have a ton of examples I could talk about, but I'll stop there unless you want a specific one.
No, I see that Margaret is making notes when you said that individuals can change organizations. And I was wondering if you'd like to comment on that, Margaret.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely individuals can change organizations. I think actually they do so all the time. One of the things that's quite interesting in the work that I've done around willful blindness is, there's a lot of work in that book about whistleblowers and people who call time on things that are going very badly wrong. And we have a very depressing, tragic narrative around whistleblowers, which is the belief that, they always get shot down, they always fail, that, they are these doomed truth tellers, Cassandra-like characters. And I think actually the story is much more complex than that. So for example, I can think of an individual whom I mentored, who was a senior engineer within a large company, who got very fed up with the fact that there were really flagrant ethical violations at the top level of his organization. And at one point he came to me and said he was so sick of it, he was really going to leave. And I turned to him and I said, well, I think that's very upstanding of you, but you are a leader in this organization. And my question is, what have you tried, and have you tried everything? And he looked kind of shocked, as if it was up to him. But I mean, he's one of the top 5 people in the whole company. So I set him a task, which was, if he had done everything, if he had tried everything, what would those things have been? And he wrote out a long list. And of course, the truth was he hadn't tried any of them. He sort of accepted that it was impossible to change this ethical misbehavior. So I said, okay, so which of these things is the easiest thing for you to do? Why don't you try that one? And the upshot is that, the main person responsible for the ethical breaches was fired, and my colleague was promoted to chief operating officer. Now, nobody tells that story, right? Because the company's not going to tell the story about, well, we had this terrible ethical breach, but we fixed it. But actually, what's so interesting is not just how easy it was. What's interesting is how he couldn't really see it at first. But the other thing that's really interesting is how much hope it gave everybody else in the organization. You know, they all kind of lifted their heads and thought, oh my God, you can get stuff done around here. So there is a really productive side effect of these kinds of change. And I think that, you know, I think the tragic narrative around whistleblowers, you know, it makes a more powerful movie, of course. But I think the truth is that I see people making these stands, making these changes all the time. But A, nobody wants to talk about how bad things were before. And B, once you get into that cycle, you're much more interested in looking forward than looking back. I mean, the other thing I would say, and I think this is really important for change makers, is you can't really time change. It's like you can't time markets. So I've written, you know, the new book that I wrote about the future, Uncharted, I wrote about a filmmaker at the BBC's Natural History Unit who made a film in 2007 about how the oceans were being spoiled by plastic waste, hoping this would change the world. And it went out one night and absolutely nothing happened. And so she became very disillusioned and went home to live in a very small village in the south of England in the countryside. And at one point just got fed up and persuaded her entire village to give up using plastic shopping bags. At which point the entire world's media camped out on her doorstep. And that was the moment at which the entire global attitude to plastic carrier bags changed. You know, she got given a canvas bag by a journalist from China who was visiting, and it said, you know, we follow Modbury, which was the name of her village. And she said, how many people live in your county? And he said, oh, 32 million. Now, why was the first experiment, which was the film, which in a way is much more tried and tested, why did that not work? Why did this very tiny grassroots experiment have a global impact? And why then 2 years ago, when another filmmaker made a film about the spoiling of the oceans by plastic, did it suddenly have an incredible influence? So, you know, I think we often get dissuaded from change because we can't prove ahead of time that it's going to work. And so what becomes really important is do one experiment. If it doesn't work, think what you've learned, do the next one, do the next one, do the next one. Don't try to plan it. Don't try to time it, because there are too many other factors that you can't control.
Thank you so much. I like both stories. The first one rings true. The guy who eventually didn't quit his job, but I guess he got promoted. Because I've been in a similar situation, but for me, it was different. I quit the job. So I guess all of us, and here I want to bring the audience in, all of us have been in the situation where we thought, oh, well, I'm really unhappy with my work and there's something I want to change, but I always find excuses to do it, to make that change happen. So please do use the chat and write in these excuses, whether it's you are afraid to talk to your boss, whether you think it doesn't make a difference at all, or whether you think freelance is insecure, unemployment is a stigma. Please use the chat function and share your personal stories on why you didn't make the change, what excuses you found. It would be fantastic to have a few comments of you in the chat to use it for a
while people are chatting and we're waiting for some stuff to show up there. You know, I would just say that when I'm working with people about change, I talk to them always about this. Who are the people you can influence? Like this story, right? That Margaret said, what have you tried? And he'd actually tried nothing. And even the story about the plastics, that change actually moves through one person being bold enough to take an action, and they are recruiting others. And so a film was designed to recruit a lot of people, and not enough people kind of on the ground were ready to really hear it. But once she started recruiting people in her town, then what happens is it builds these bridges and these links to other places, and they say, oh, I see that, and I want to, and then it grows. And so there is this emergent nature to change, which I think is aligned with what Margaret was saying, is that you can't plan it or time it, but you can understand that you can influence the people close to you, organizations can influence other ones, and if you just begin with action where you have some control, almost always making change and doing something is inspiring. It does inspire others, and you will be surprised at the people that want to join your group and your movement. But we don't teach people that change, it fundamentally has an emergent and unpredictable nature.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I think, you know, it's so interesting because the only thing, when it comes to change, the only thing you can guarantee, really guarantee, is that if you do nothing, nothing will happen, right? And yet what's so interesting is that in some cases, people would rather prefer that negative certainty to positive uncertainty. But I think that, you know, if you want the situation to change, and this is, you know, very much the thesis of willful blindness, ignoring it is the way to ensure that it won't change.
Margaret, Jenny, there's a comment from the chat which I really like, and maybe Joel Turner wants to tell his story live. He writes, I feel like I'm hindered by imposter syndrome. Joel, would you like to explain? Is there anyone else who would
Yeah. Hi everyone. Yeah, so someone who's afraid of imposter syndrome, it's very kind of you to put them on the spot. No, I think thinking of if there's recurring things where I want to change my behavior, or thinking in the context of personal improvements, I think the thing that weighs me down more often than not is this fear of being exposed as a fraud, and even having the recognition that this might be in my head is a chain that kind of weighs me down. And so I'm curious if this is something others contend with.
Thank you so much, Joel, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot there.
No, not a problem.
I see you're not the only one, though, who talked about imposter syndrome. You know, I think part of the solution there is really looking for allies, you know, talking to other people, because this misperception, I think that imposter syndrome is just one of the many ways that human beings have misperceptions about themselves and others. It's just one of the ways that it manifests, that we think that we're in the minority when we're really in the majority because everyone's quiet. We think we're the majority when we're really a deviant minority just because the minority is kind of loud, and we're seeing, you know, these kinds of things happening in the US. And when we desire change and we're part of the minority, but we're all quiet, or we're all kind of burdened by our own imposter syndrome, we cannot take action. And so looking for people that will stand with us, you know, some of the when people talk about change, right, they say the most important action in a chain of events that creates change is neither the leader nor the group of people that follow. It's the first person who follows. So someone says, I want to take a new path, and so sometimes we get frightened because we've tried one tiny thing, or we're not sure if anybody will join us. The way to create change, though, is to rope in those second and third followers, right? So that when you take that step, you know that someone is going to say, I'll follow, and that someone else is going to say, oh, I'll follow. And then when you have three people saying, yes, let's go this direction, let's try something new, then it makes it so much easier for everyone else to follow.
This reminds me of the how to build a movement in 3 minutes fun clip on YouTube that you should all check out.
Yeah.
Let's take another one in. I see a question or a kind of statement is that next time I will do it differently. That's a quite common one. Is there anyone who would like to share their story via video chat? For example, there's another one, Alice Sung. She writes, as an individual external voice, I have no influence over government or decision makers. Alice, would you like to elaborate on that, or can I put the question on to the speakers or the statement? Then I put it onto the speakers. The feeling that I have no influence over government or decision makers.
Well, I mean, my rather harsh word for these excuses is these are alibis. You know, this means I'm not present at the scene of the crime, right? And I think, you know, if I think personally of what drives me to action, a lot of it is just thinking, yikes, when people find out what was going on, I don't want to be the person who sat there doing nothing. I think Jenny's point about allies is absolutely essential, partly because, you know, we have this very heroic narrative that the person who creates change is a completely solo hero, and they kind of charge into the horizon and everything changes around them. And anybody who's studied any example of change will see it is never, ever like that. It is never one person. You know, Bob Geldof didn't do Live Aid all by himself. You know, Einstein didn't come up with a theory of relativity all by himself. Salk didn't invent the polio vaccine all by himself. The story of change is always the story of multiple people from different areas supporting change for lots of different agendas. You know, so even this idea of alignment, well, maybe, maybe not. I have a colleague who's sort of organizing this phenomenal experiment up in Maine about how to make dairy farming carbon neutral. It has about 10 different partners, from universities to Stonyfield Yogurt to the US Department of Agriculture. These organizations all want something completely different out of the experiment, but nevertheless, if the experiment and the project works well, it will be a source of profound change. So I think it's, you know, it always depresses me to think how much more creativity goes into the excuses than into the action. And but I come back to, because it turned up, you know, in several of the things in the chat box, I come back to this thing, which is, I think people feel, because we're imbued with a planning mindset, and funding organizations want a theory of change so that they know if I give this organization this amount of money, I am guaranteed change. But the truth is, if it were that simple, it would have been done by now. So we have to accept the uncertainty anytime we want change. We have to accept that actually we may have all sorts of things we didn't expect, some of them good and some of them bad. And I spent quite a lot of time last year writing about how the gay community dealt with the AIDS crisis. And, you know, this is a situation where plans could not be made. No vaccine, no understanding of the medicine, no government funding, no internal unity, a fantastically fractious community, you know, and a horrible, horrible, horrible disease where in 1990, 1 American was dying every minute of AIDS. And you still have phenomenal disunity and people going off at all kinds of tangents. But in the end, it was successful, not because it was this nice, tidy project from one step to another to another. It was a kind of chaotic ball of energy with incredible momentum, a lot of luck, quite a lot of accident. And the thing that's really interesting, I mean, the whole thing is a fascinating. The thing that's really interesting, in the UK, when the gay community was totally lost and confused and couldn't think of what to do, a huge part of it went off to support striking coal miners. It looks insane, right? They did that because this is just another group of marginalized people who aren't being taken seriously. 15 years later, because of the coal miners forced the Labour Party to bring in gay marriage. Nobody would have planned to get gay marriage by this route, right? But the thing is that change drives change. And once you kind of upset the pot, stuff is going to happen. And some of it's going to be very unfortunate. We call those perverse outcomes. And some of them are going to be unexpected benefits. But the only thing you know is if you let the pot just sit there, nothing will happen.
Thank you, Margaret. Luciana, I was looking at you, and you were laughing when Margaret talked about procrastination. Do you have a story to tell? Would you like to come on live on video and share your story with us? Because you were laughing and no. And I also see that Carlos Alonso, you're making a lot of notes. You're writing down much. This is very interesting to you. Is there anything you would like to add? Do you have a personal story you would like to quickly share with us?
Well, just a little bit, because I'm in this moment. I know I'm with so many thoughts in my head, but maybe I can talk about a little bit of my experience. I'm from Mexico, but currently I'm living in Germany, and it's really overwhelming, because the behavior of my community in Mexico is so much different as the behavior here in Germany. So when we are talking about change and the boundaries that we have, that we want to overpassing, and the thresholds, it's, for me, I don't know, uncertainty and this and all these crises, these multiple crises happen in this moment. I believe it could be really overwhelmed, and yes, no change comes alone, and there's no one hero. Believing maybe in this community empowerment to change things, it's I think so in this moment the best I don't know how to say it, the best thing that we can take to lead new pathways and find new paradigms. I believe so, but I believe
thank you so much.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Carlos.
I want to comment about this vision about the lone change maker, the hero change maker. This is one of the things that we teach in our sociology classes, especially American culture is very bad about this. Other, native cultures around the world have a much more kind of community-oriented perspective, that they think about action with the community and for the community. And so this kind of individualistic bias is what we see both in our solutions for change, that we're like, what's the problem? Find the bad actors, or find the people, the one person who's making all this, bad stuff, and go after them. And then when we think about change, we elevate and we uplift a single person. One of my favorite examples, I always ask my students to think about how we valorize heroes, and we also seek out individual villains. And I ask them for examples, and my students say, the US presidency. We think about it as one person, and we say, oh, the president does all of these things, but really the presidency is a massive team, and the president is only able to accomplish what so far it's only been he. My children like to remind me that this is a kind of crazy thing. There's only been male presidents, but that it's really this team, but we obscure who the team is and what they're doing. And I want you all to understand that obscuring of teamness and the community that makes change, it hinders us deeply in several ways. One, it helps us not really see and identify the opportunity for change. It makes us all feel less able to be agents of change, and it hides the activity and the ways that we all can contribute to change. And so it's part of this narrative that, Margaret was talking about, that people kind of, can't see. So that's the challenge I put out to all of you, that I ask you. What if you started thinking about everything as a group and a team, and you started looking for all of the people that could contribute? Who is your first ally? Who is the organization, the example that Margaret gave about the coal miners, right? That once people begin acting as allies and working towards change, it inspires other people to join. What could you do if you stop saying it's too hard, I don't know? Because the don't know, it's too hard, is that you think you should be able to see the path. You can't. That's the meaning of emergence. You only need to be able to see the next step, the first step. And Margaret's story about the guy was, if you had a step, he picked the easiest one. And the easiest one got the most unethical person fired and him promoted. What if you all looked for one step? What is the next step?
Thank you, Jenny. I see there's a hand raised. Ivan, would you like to go live with your question?
Just a comment that talking about this about change, that I agree that change is like our movements are made by masses of people, but through history we see repeatedly that the movements also always have a face or a single person or an agent. No, they become like a brand. So I just want to add that, like, I think a good tool for change, it's like to make it, let's say, fashionable, or like a trend. We see it, I saw it last year with Greta Thunberg, the effect it had in the world. Like, I saw people, I'm also from Mexico, but I live in Prague. I saw people like protesting or sharing the materials and this and that without knowing too deep about it, but just because it was, let's say, cool to be part of this, right? So yeah. Yes.
Thank you, Ivan. When you mentioned Greta Thunberg, Margaret, you told me something on the phone the other day about her, about the network that she can't do without.
Yes, well, of course, Greta can only do what she does because her parents help her, and because other people help her parents, and because, her whole family supports her. I mean, I think this narrative of the heroic soloist is crazy. And actually, if I think of how the gay community overcame AIDS, I mean, I know some of the leading people in that community, but I bet the public doesn't. And I would say a huge amount of the gay community doesn't know who led the fight against AIDS. It had so many leaders. And in fact, I think when we're going to confront something like climate change, I think Greta Thunberg is a very important and powerful voice, but by no means the only one, and by no means enough. So I think, we have to find all kinds of different talents. One of the things, to Jenny's excellent point about emergence, it's not very long when you're talking about change before you start talking about leadership. And I think the leaders of movements are not appointed, they emerge too. So again, in the fight against AIDS, there's this very strange, middle-aged, white, straight housewife who used to work in drug development, who turns up at an AIDS meeting just because she's interested. And her name is Iris Long. And she says to people eventually, you don't understand anything about drug development. And if you don't understand it, the people who do it aren't going to pay attention to you and take you seriously. And so she rolled up her sleeves and she taught them everything about drug development, which is how we got successful AIDS drugs. And then when she was done, she went back home and continued to be a housewife. I mean, this is not our model of leadership, but this is actually how it happens. And I also have a friend here in the UK named Sarah Corbett. Sarah is what's known as a craftivist. So she uses craft, so needlework and embroidery and knitting and things like that, for activism. And in order to persuade a very large employer in this country to adopt a living wage, she identified every single member of the board. She did huge amounts of research on them personally, what they really, really cared about. And she and all of her supporters embroidered these magnificent handkerchiefs for them to talk in the terms of their personal passions, what a living wage could do or not do. And that was the argument that ultimately led to the board changing their policy on the wages that they paid their staff. So tackling people on that, in that rather quiet, not noisy way, can be as impactful as being a really, really big brand. It's important to think, for example, that the biggest influence on conservative dads in America about climate change are 16-year-old girls, their daughters. So you may think you can't do anything, but if you're teaching those girls, you can do a lot, because they go home and they talk to their parents.
Let me quickly connect your point on climate change to what to Carlos' experience in Germany, and to a study that shows that if you are from Puerto Rico and you move to the States, to the mainland, your carbon footprint is very low where you came from. But as soon as you move to your new system, to your new habitat, so to speak, your carbon footprint increases immensely, even though you live the same kind of life. So clearly, this is a systemic question that individuals find very difficult to change. Jenny, you're nodding.
You know, if you live in America, you have the biggest carbon footprint on the planet, and it's very hard to change that. So, and you know, when you are in this context where it's hard to change, it's so easy to just feel overwhelmed and to think, you know, I can't do anything. And so I think a big part of change is helping people to see, to look for and to recognize where they can, you know, make a difference, to understand what can be changed in the system and how they can build allies. And that it's, you know, my husband, he and I often vote on different sides of the ballot. And, you know, he says, this whole liberal guilt thing, honey, you guys are just walking around feeling so guilty about all the things that you're not able to change and the good things you can't do. He says, I don't think it's helping you. How does feeling guilty help you? And I think that when he first said that to me, I wanted to growl at him, because I was reading these magazines about like natural homes and how we could have a better home, you know, and I thought, I need to take him seriously. How is this guilt, you know, hindering us and keeping us from seeing how we can make change?
But I think that's a really beautiful example, because listening to the people who disagree with you is can be a fantastically creative experience. Because if they're simply describing life as they see it from their perspective, if you can find a way to engage with them and to take that seriously rather than dismissing it, then you're one step closer to persuading them. But simply saying, well, obviously they're wrong, you know, it means you've lost the chance of making them an ally, and you've lost the chance of thinking differently yourself.
Yes, so we are, I see the time, we are coming to an end, but we still have some minutes. So I would really like to understand from the two of you, and maybe also from the rest of the audience, where does the power to change rest in? If you could put it down to a few simple things. Maybe Margaret, you'd like to go first.
Okay. I think it resides in all of us. I think I mean, I have a sort of mantra. It doesn't really matter where you start, only that you do. I generally tend to think when there's something I feel motivated to change, my first thought is, where do I have allies? I think of it actually as a Venn diagram. So one circle is, what resources do I have? And that's the people I know and the abilities that I have. Then I think about, do I have enough passion over this issue? Because if I don't, I'm not going to have the energy to stay the course. So I have to attack something about which I'm passionate. I have to attack something where I think I have some resources that might be relevant. And I want to attack something where I think there's real need, which is, if I'm the only person who cares about it, it's probably not a big deal. So I think of the diagram as passion, need, and resources, and where they intersect is where I intervene. So I think about, who are the people I know who could help, or who are the people who know about this, or who are the people I know who know about the other side. And then I just start talking to them, and I learn and I learn and I learn. And the more I learn, the more people I meet, and the more people I meet, the more allies I find. And eventually it turns into something that in retrospect you would call a strategy, but it's much more improvised than a strategy suggests. And I think, not surprisingly, this is pretty much the way that entrepreneurs act too, which is, where is there a problem? Where does it really matter? Who can help?
Thank you, Margaret. Jenny, in your opinion, where does the power to make a change rest in? It's an open question.
Yeah, I mean, I think, based on the things we've been talking about here, I didn't think this is what I was going to say today, but I do think that it begins with your belief that you can make a change. And you have to stop convincing yourself that you don't have the power. Once you do that, then you can do these things that Margaret was talking about. And you also can start looking at the bigger picture about the system and say, how can we change the system? How are people stuck in the system? It's very hard to get farmers to change their fertilizer, not because farmers don't care about being stewards, not because they don't care about the health of the ocean, but because if they use less fertilizer, they're stuck in this market where they must pay more next year. And so if you're trying to just find financial incentives to persuade farmers, you've missed the opportunity to empathize with them, to understand what they're saying about why it's hard for them to make a change. And when you listen and understand, it allows you to see that problem in the system, that it's the market and the economics. Then you can see a creative opportunity and a solution to that. But if we don't begin by talking and listening and thinking that we can make a change, if we just say it's too big, then we really can't get anywhere.
I think you should definitely join into our next SOFA session, which is next Thursday. It's on July the 2nd at 4 p.m. Central European time, because there we will have one person in particular who is tackling one of the biggest challenges at all. He wants to introduce a universal basic income in Switzerland, and he's going to tell us about his campaign and the way that the changes it needs in mindsets, in all kinds of behaviors for that to happen. He will be there together with Soraya Axelsson, and she's from a Swedish city of Helsingborg, and she will talk about change management in a city and how you can actually, or what you have to do in a city to change the mindset and the behavior of public servants to make the changes for the rest of us. So you may want to tune in next week. It's going to be fantastic. So these are also the closing remarks of this marvelous session we had today. Thank you so much, Jenny. Thank you, Margaret. And thank you for the audience for being with us. We still have a poll where you can rate how much you liked the session. And I leave it at that. If you have any closing remarks, Margaret, maybe you want to greet someone, Jenny.
Well, I mean, I think all I would say is, I would endorse what you say, Matthias, but I would really say, when you see things that are going wrong, you're either complicit by doing nothing, or you can move towards improvement by doing something.
Thank you.
And I would just add that the most important action you take is the next one.
Yes.
One of my former students, Joel, is here on the line, and I've been teaching my students for the last 15 or 20 years that you don't actually have to know the whole path.
Right.
You only need to know two things. You need to know what is the end goal that you most desire. What is that deep, important thing you want? If it's to get plastics out of the oceans, or it's to have, transportation justice, you have to know deeply what that thing is that you care about, and let go of what you think the path is, and then look for what the first step is that gets you movement towards it. And then you will be surprised by the allies that come along and those next steps. So if you can change your framework from thinking you have to plan it out to just looking for that next step and that first action you can take, you will make much more progress.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you.
Thanks.
Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.